Planning your bike trip can be daunting, but it's actually not as difficult as it may seem with a bit of pre-planning.
In this video, we're going to share some tips of how we plan our bicycle trips.
Remember, the most difficult part is always getting started. We use a variety of different websites, applications and resources to plan our bicycle trips. We'll go into greater detail on these later on, but a quick summary, the main ones we use are Komoot, bikepacking.com, really useful website, Google Maps, iOverlander, Warm Showers, Windy, which is really important for cyclists, wind direction. We use a weather app which depends on obviously where we are in the world. Different apps are better in different places. Airbnb and booking.com, very useful for accommodation. Also popular ones which we don't use are Ride with GPS and Map My Ride. These are good planning applications. The planning app you use depends on whereabouts in the world you are in terms of its quality, but we've only used Komoot so far and it's served us really well. We're going to go into greater detail on these shortly.
The amount of planning required will depend on whether we're following a specific route, such as Carretera Austral, or if we're making our own route through the country. If we are following a specific route, there's usually quite a lot of information available online on websites such as bikepacking.com, or there's always a fellow cyclist who's happy to share their GPX file with us. If we are creating our own route, we usually have to be a bit more creative. First of all, we'll have to decide on what routes to take. We'll always prioritize quiet, safe, and calm roads. However, it's not always possible. A lot of times we have no choice but to cycle on a busy road. If that happens, we try to look for roads with hard shoulders so we don't have to share the road with the rest of the traffic. However, we will always prioritize cycling on gravel roads, provided that the gravel quality is okay. Usually, we try to ask locals or fellow cyclists if they find gravel okay. And if they tell us that it's a very slow progress, we might reconsider.
This is absolutely insane.
Normally, when deciding which road to take, we first look at Google Maps.
So a very useful idea for seeing what streets look like and what the quality of the road is Google Maps. So this is an example here. This is Mexico City, where we are right now. And if I take the little man here, and for example, I can just drop him on any street, it doesn't really matter. And it shows you straight away what the quality of the road is like. So for us, leaving Mexico City, we'll want to see around where we are exactly what the quality of roads are like and how busy they are. And it gives us a good idea generally on Google Maps. Another thing we also want to look at is if there are bicycle lanes. Now, bicycle lanes information varies depending on which country you're in, but based on this map here, if you click on layers and cycling down in the bottom left here, straight away it shows you where all the bike lanes are, which again is not available in all countries. Mexico, it does have it, but for example Bolivia, where we were recently, does not have any bicycle lane information, so it depends on where you are. Also worth mentioning that Street View is also not available in many countries. It just depends where you are, so it's worth checking that out. This, for example, is Mexico City. We'll be leaving on this bicycle lane here, so we can also check on the more rural roads what the quality of the road is like by dropping the man here. We'll use the direction feature to get a rough idea of the distance between places. So for us, Mexico City is where we're going to be leaving from. Let's just use the city in general, but obviously you will use your own location and directions. And then our next kind of big destination is Puebla in Mexico. And you notice here, in Mexico, it gives you the cycling option. So you can click on cycling. Now that is the most direct route, and we'll kind of use that as a base for when we're planning our route. It's not the exact route we'll use, and we'll talk about that later on, but it gives you a good idea of what the distance is and what sort of roads you're going to be taking. So once we've got our bearings and had a look on Google Maps for cycle lanes, etc., we then go onto our favorite app to do more detailed planning, which is Komoot. Now this can be done on both phone and the laptop or computer, so it's really handy in that sense. Probably do most of it on the phone just because it's more convenient. We'll click on Plan New Route here, and once that's opened, we can type in our starting point, which in this case, for us, will be Mexico City. And obviously you can be more specific with where you're staying. And the end point for us, the same one, the next big destination is Puebla. Now, this again has just taken a kind of rough route, but you can change it. So there's various modes here you can look at, so mountain bike and road cycling. We'll stick to cycling here because it's general bicycle traveling, and I tend to put untrained. It gives a more realistic time span because we're carrying a lot of stuff. I think this generally takes it from the perspective that you're not carrying much at all. And from here you can then go about planning your route. So say you want to take the more scenic route like we'll be doing, you can see there's a lot of highlights here left by other cyclists. And these are quite often good indications of what roads are often cycled. So for us in this case, say we want to take this road, which is pretty much bang on, we'll click Include on Route, and that adds that as a waypoint. Now, if we want to go all the way down here through this green area, which again we tend to try and do to avoid the busier areas, and this is supplemented by research on Google Maps for how busy the road looks, etc. You can see here, we've got slightly more accurate route this time. Again, it's not perfect, we have to add waypoints in different parts we want to go through, but that's kind of the basic idea of how it works. A few more good features that Komoot offers is it tells you the ascent and descent here. So you've got the elevation, how much climbing there will be. It gives you a really good indication. And this looks more accurate when you have a shorter route planned. If you have a route of a couple of thousand kilometers, for example, this will be harder to follow. So when you have shorter routes, it gives you a much better indication of what the ascent and descent will be. Obviously tells you the distance of the ride. You can see here, in kilometers we have it, and here obviously uphill and downhill. Now this is our finalized route from Mexico City to Puebla, more or less. You can see we've got various waypoints here with our route. Now what we'll then do is save the route by clicking here. Once that's saved, you can download a GPX file, and this GPX file you can then, I send it to my phone usually, and then synchronize it with the Garmin device, Garmin Connect, which again is really easy to do and doesn't take much time at all. And there I have the route on my device which I can follow. Another thing worth mentioning is that if you have downloaded a route from, say, bikepacking.com, you can click here, import a GPS file, and that route that you've downloaded, GPXs are available all over the web, but there's a few good websites such as Bikepacking, which has a lot of well-known cycle routes. You can upload the file right here, and then it'll appear on Komoot, ready-made for you. Now that I've made my Komoot route online, I can then synchronize it to my phone, or I might have made it on my phone originally. And one thing that's really important to remember is that you should always save the route offline, because then if you're out in the sticks and you don't have access to internet, how are you going to access your map? Very easy. This is the Mexico City to Puebla route that I made. You can see the route here. Scroll up on your device and your phone, save offline. You can see right here. And there's a little tab. You can select it and it downloads the map offline. One thing to bear in mind when using Komoot, there is a subscription, a paid option, but we don't use that. What we use is the one-off paid fee, which unlocks all the world maps or certain regions, and it wasn't much. At the time, I think it was about 20, 30 pounds, so it's very affordable and it's a one-off fee, so you don't need to pay the monthly subscription unless you want those additional features, which we've not made any use of.
Planning your route is accommodation. If you're in a fairly populated area, you don't need to plan as much, as there will be plenty of options available. However, if you're out in the wilderness, it's a different story. The first thing we tend to look at is iOverlander, which is a very popular app among cyclists. iOverlander contains a lot of information on wild camping spots, campsites, accommodation, as well as other information, and it's all added by fellow travelers. Not everything is marked on iOverlander, so we also tend to check Google Maps for campsites. A top tip would be to check Google Maps to find the accommodation you're looking for and see if they have contact details. We do this because, for example, in Latin America, a lot of businesses use WhatsApp, and you can contact them in advance. Another two platforms we use frequently are Booking.com and Airbnb. At the moment, I'm looking at the flat in Mexico City. On Booking.com, it costs £124. However, the same flat on Airbnb costs £128. While the difference is not huge here, in the past we saved anything up to £20 just comparing the prices on different platforms. Another brilliant platform for cyclists is Warm Showers. You have to pay a one-off fee to join this platform. However, after you join, you get details of hundreds and thousands of hosts available all across the world. You can see who's available in the area by clicking on these green markers on the map, which show you the host. And then you can find out more about them by opening their profile.
You obviously won't get very far without food or water, so at least having some kind of an idea about where you can top up supplies is handy. In more built-up areas, this isn't really an issue because there tend to be shops pretty much everywhere. If we're going to be in the wilderness for a long period of time, then we will plan accordingly and stock up. An example of this was when we were in the Atacama Desert and we had to plan ahead for 7 days. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, then some countries will be more difficult, so they will require some more careful planning. Another thing we always tend to do is to carry a little bit of extra food, especially if we're out in the wilderness. You never know when you'll need it, and it really has paid off on numerous occasions for us. A final point to make here is that availability of food and water is different everywhere you go, so the key thing here is planning and research, depending on where you are in the world.
Quite a big factor to consider when you're bicycle touring is the weather. Every country or region seems to have an app that works best. For example, the one that was frequently recommended to us in Chile was called Meteoret. Wind is kind of important. We found that the best app that works for us is Windy. It gives a good projection of wind direction and speed. Windy can also be used for all weather, not just wind. Chances are that you will get caught in the rain and have some tough headwinds at times. But it definitely helps to stay on top of it, so you can plan accordingly. We like to plan rest days when it's a complete washout, or if there will be brutal headwinds, but obviously it's not always possible. Another thing worth mentioning is sunrise and sunset times. At certain latitudes and times of the year, sunsets and sunrises can vary hugely, so it's definitely worth checking. You don't want to be pedaling on the main road when it's dark, but it happens to everyone.
Local knowledge can never be underestimated, and we ask locals things all the time, but there are a few things to keep in mind. In certain countries, for example, in our experience so far, almost everywhere in Latin America, you'll get told you can't do it by bike. En bicicleta? No se puede. Take this with a big pinch of salt. They often can't quantify distances as cyclists and are thinking from the perspective of car drivers. That being said, locals have great knowledge and information about, for example, road conditions, distances, safety in certain areas, and things as simple as where the next shop is. It's worth mentioning that on occasions 1 kilometer has actually ended up being 10. Your safety is obviously something that should never be underestimated, but it's something that should be taken with a pinch of salt too. Why is that? Well, we've been told in certain areas that it's very dangerous and you simply cannot pass. And then we've gone to the said area and we found that the people there have been nothing but kind and hospitable. So on the matter of safety, always get a second or even a third opinion. Now this depends on where in the world you are, but we've actually even flagged down vehicles in certain parts of Latin America and they'd be more than happy to oblige. Remember, even countries that are deemed as being dangerous, the people are almost always very friendly and welcoming. This has been our experience so far everywhere in Latin America. To conclude, obviously planning a bicycle trip is not an exact science. There are many factors to consider, but everything we've talked about in this video is how we go about planning a bicycle tour or a section of it. Being spontaneous is great and we're all for it, but we do like to have an idea of where we're going at least a few days in advance.
Flexibility is key. None of these steps guarantee anything, and changes will happen. Bicycle touring is unpredictable, so make sure you are aware of this.
As a general rule, we like to stay 2 to 3 days ahead in terms of planning, unless, for example, we know that we'll be out in the wilderness. If we're going to be out in the sticks for a couple of weeks, then a more detailed plan may be necessary.
Some popular cycle routes, such as Carretera Austral, have so many cyclists and there's only one route to follow, so a lot of planning won't be necessary.
There are obviously way more planning resources and strategies, but these are the ones we've used so far and it's worked really well for us.
How do you guys plan your cycling trips?
Did we miss anything? If we did, then please let us know in the comments.